Things are going to start happening to me now.
You've done all the reading. You're a scholar. You're a professor. You've done all the reading. You've done the intellectual heavy lifting.
More or less, eat shit and die.
You wouldn't know a fact if it begged you all night long.
Want to give the wrong impression because I am very high.
Fucking right up behind him with a hatchet. Smash, smash, smash. Yeah.
Care. I'm a libertarian. What I'm getting is,
Did you vote for Joe Jorgensen or Trump?
Who?
Joe Jorgensen. That was the perfect answer. Thank you. That was...
And welcome everybody to the Libertarian Podcast Review. Today we've got a special guest. I call them a legend, a legendary journalist, John Ziegler. John, thank you for coming on the show. First of all, I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, I hope.
Yeah, who knows what you're getting into. You said, hey, I'll go on any show and maybe you'll stop that policy. Why don't you give everybody first an overview of exactly who you are, what you've been doing, because it goes back a long way. I know you have your podcast, 2 podcasts, mention those. You still write for Mediaite, is that correct?
Actually, I don't write for Mediaite anymore.
Okay.
I started that about a year ago, but I don't think we have enough time for my full career story. So I'll just give the thumbnail sketch, which is right now I co-host a podcast, which is called The Death of Journalism. I co-host that with a woman by the name of Liz Habib, who's a former Los Angeles news and sports TV anchor at the Fox affiliate. Here in Los Angeles market where I live just outside of Los Angeles. We also did a true crime podcast together called With the Benefit of Hindsight about the entire Penn State, Joe Paterno, Jerry Sandusky scandal, which the media completely and totally blew, which we released last year, which is epic and which I urge everyone to check out. And almost everyone who has checked it out has had their mind completely and totally blown. But before that, I did a whole bunch of things. I've had a very storied, maybe legendary, maybe infamous career in the media where I've had spectacular failures and intermittent minor successes and have been involved in a lot of very, very high-profile stories, either directly or indirectly. And so it's never been boring. It hasn't always been successful, hasn't always turned out the way that it should be, but it has provided me with a lot of great stories to tell. And I tell a lot of them in our podcast, The Death of Journalism.
Yeah. So by the way, I do podcast reviews and yours came on my radar and I'm like, I'm going to do a review of this, but you, John, made it impossible. You had 3-hour sessions per episode. Super in depth. The only thing and I did talk about it a little bit. The only thing I could say is people just have to go out there and listen to it. It's truly is mind blowing. The first time I heard you talking about this, I think it was on Glenn Beck years before, and you were working your way through some of this, and it was crazy. There's multiple things I want to talk with you about today. So one of the Sandusky Paterno, I don't want to get into it too deep because we don't have time for that. But
no, we don't. But I do want people to check out With the Benefit of Hindsight because it's an amazing journalistic achievement.
You can't. Yes, and that's maybe the legendary part of it. It blew me away. 2 quick aspects. I just thought, people say, oh, because they know the initial story that the one that the media is told, and so everyone makes the Sandusky jokes, the shower room and all those kind of things. And I say 2 things about that came away from your podcast, and then maybe you can give a synopsis of yours thing. It was just, one, he basically had no testosterone and there was no child porn or porn of any kind found in his possession, which to me is, as an attorney and kind of dealing in some of the seedy stuff, that is almost impossible. So those 2 things blew my mind. What is the biggest takeaway or revelations you can give someone to be convinced to at least take the dive down and start?
Well, to me, the easiest way to get people interested in this story now in 2022 is to tell them when you go into the Penn State Paterno Sandusky story, it'll help you understand how the heck the COVID paranoia and panic occurred, because they are the same story with just obviously very different details. And I believe that the Penn State story, have been deeply embedded in that for 11 years now, prepared me in a very unique and tremendous way to understand what was going to happen with COVID. And I believe I was way ahead of the game on COVID because I saw it coming down the mountain like a freight train. And I saw the perfect storm of circumstances because the same basic perfect storm of circumstances that occurred in the Penn State situation. So that's the big picture of why people should to put their toe in this pond that is going to lead to the most amazing ride you've ever taken in podcasting. And if we lived in a rational world, especially with true crime podcasts being as hot as they are, everybody would know about with the benefit of hindsight. But the news media has absolutely positively zero interest in publicizing a podcast that makes them all look like complete and total idiots. And maybe that, by the way, that's best case scenario that they're idiots. There's also corruption involved in here. From the standpoint of the evidence, well, you really have put your finger on maybe it's the most basic and most obvious element of this case that no one ever talks about. And I'm glad you mentioned it. It is unheard of for a serial pedophile in the modern age to be as investigated 1/1000th as much as Jerry Sandusky was investigated and have absolutely positively zero pornography. Yeah. Zero. There's never been another case like this that has ever been. And ironically enough, the only pornography in the entire case that was found on the email of the prosecutors and the investigators and one of the judges in the case. Right. That was the only pornography. And Jerry Sandusky is a technical dunce. There's absolutely positively no way he could have hidden anything. And you mentioned his physical ailments. Not only does he have no testosterone at the time of many of the most hellacious allegations against him, he had virtually no testicles. We have the medical records to prove this, that he literally had virtually no testicular matter. And yet none of these boys/men, and let's be clear, one of the major misconceptions of this case is somehow that these were little boys that were being molested. That's not even the allegation. The allegations are these boys, when they were 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, sometimes even 16, were somehow, as heterosexual boys, they're all heterosexual. Right. We're all sexually molested by an old man. Most of the time as a former assistant college football coach who's running a charity. He's not a god. He's driving a lousy car. He doesn't even have any money, and he never tries to pay them off. No payoffs. Forget about no pornography. No payoffs. No drugs. No alcohol. He doesn't use any pornography with them to ply them. There's no assaults alleged. There's no nothing. It defies on its very most basic premise. It doesn't even get past the laugh test. That's what's so amazing about this case, is that when you delve into it, not only am I right that everybody was innocent in this case, it's not even close. I mean, I have to say that I have yet to find one person who has given our podcast a legitimate try and hasn't come away at least mostly, if not totally, convinced that the whole story was bullcrap. Not one person has, and I'll do, as you already alluded to, I'll do an interview with anybody. Here I am defying the conventional wisdom on one of the biggest stories of this millennium. I'll talk to anybody, and none of my critics will ever take me on this because they know they'll get destroyed because the facts are all on my side, and it's not close.
Was there any fallout or positive or negative from the podcast, or did it just kind of push it along and you've got some downloads? But I mean, with the families, with the media, with anything, have you seen any kind of impact?
Well, we just did an interview with the former president of Penn State, Graham Spanier, today for our Death of Journalism podcast, and he was very effusive in his praise of the podcast, basically paving the way for him to be able to write his book. That when he does his book appearances across mostly the state of Pennsylvania, the book is called In the Lion's Den, he is always taken aback by how many people who come to his events have listened to our podcast and who are already convinced that he was an innocent man that was sent to jail for something that never happened. That's a pretty good impact. I mean, there are other minor ones. I think to me, the biggest one is that there are, I don't know what the number is, but there are thousands of people who went through an enormous trauma because of this story, whether they were Penn Staters or people in the central Pennsylvania area, State College area, or just somebody who just was horrified by the story, but who never felt like it made a lot of sense, who now can feel whole. They can now feel like, oh, okay, that didn't really happen. And now somebody has put these puzzle pieces together. And what we were, basically what happened here was the media took these puzzle pieces and put them together in a jumbled bit that to a rational person doesn't make any damn sense at all. And I took the puzzle pieces and I said, hold on a second. Let's put this over here. Let's put this one over here, this one over here. And look what we have. We have a story that actually makes a hell of a lot of sense, but it's not the one you were told by the news media. And I have to say, I think one of the strengths of, with the benefit of hindsight, one of the things I'm most proud of is my critics. They say I'm crazy. They think I'm a pedophile defender. They call me every name in the book. Not only can they never take a shot at my position, they can never tell a story. They can never tell a full story that makes any sense at all. No one has even tried to tell us the conventional wisdom of this story. I go through, in one of our later episodes, I go through bit by bit, piece by piece, moment by moment, and I tell you, here's what really happened. And I defy anyone to listen to that episode and not go, gee, that makes a hell of a lot more sense than what we were told. And the facts are actually on my side. So I hope people will check it out.
Yeah. By the way, they should. You mentioned early on, I think it was maybe even your first episode of called something like, what was the
date?
No,
that was what's the first episode is called The Date because they got the date of the query episode right. completely wrong.
I'm thinking of you just mentioned the phrase about a maelstrom of everything coming together.
Perfect storm.
Perfect storm. Thank you. Perfect storm. And I just saw this show on Netflix. It's this British show. I'm not going to tell you, but it's so preposterous. All these little things that happened after the next. I'm laughing. It's kind of a murder thing. And it's not, it makes me think it's like sci-fi because it's so outlandish. And yet I forgot about this story of how you've got all these incompetent people and just the next thing, the church, the ESPN, everything that was happening at the time, the perfect storm. And I'm like, okay, so maybe it's not such a ridiculous thing. When you sat down and did these, I'm just curious, are you just free flowing off your head and you have like an outline? Because it doesn't come across that you're reading it. You've got a lot of passion when you say it. And by the way, if you're just free flowing this, you're a savant of some sort, or you've lived this way too deep.
I think it's more the latter than the former.
Okay.
It's very interesting that you picked up on that because one of the things that I think my co-host Liz Abib and our producer Mike Agavino were both in awe of, as well as frustrated by,
and maybe scared of,
was that I would come in with almost no notes. And only a very, very thin outline of where we were going, which kind of put Liz in a tough spot.
Yeah.
Because Liz she hadn't lived the story. She had reported on it as a TV sports anchor. But Liz does a great job during the entire podcast of playing the role of the listener who kind of knows the story, but doesn't know the details. And so she says, wait a minute, hold on.
Yeah.
And so I do not read anything in this podcast.
Goddamn.
One of the things I told Mike, because Mike Gavino at the beginning of this, I think he thought, my God, the production time in this is going to be off the charts because if we're going to do this much content, it's all going to be scripted. My God, I can't even imagine how much time we're going to have to put into that. I said, Mike, you don't have to worry about that. You have me. Because I have lived this thing for, at that time, 9 or 10 years, and it's embedded in my hard drive at this point. All I have to do is press play and on any particular subject, and it's going to come out in a coherent fashion.
Did you find anything that you said in those that you like kind of had to fact check back? Like maybe I just misstated some.
It's so funny. the only one that I'm positive I screwed up, which I think is a pretty good testament to it. I for some reason said that that Paterno's last game where he became the winningest coach in the history of college football was a home game when it was actually an away game, and I hadn't checked that, and I thought it was a home game because in my mind it didn't make any sense for Penn State to have played a home game followed by a bye, followed by another home game. So I thought it must have been an away game, but no, I was corrected by the Penn State fandom and said, no, that was an away game home game. I don't want to screw it up again. A home game where Paterno had become the winningest coach in the history of college football during the 2011 season. And by the way, that's not an academic event that occurs in this timeline. That is an incredibly significant moment in the perfect storm from all sorts of different angles. We don't have time to get into it, but I can tell you that the fact that there was a bye week right when the Sandusky story hits, and then a home game against Nebraska, which should have been Joe Paterno's final home game at Penn State, being aired by ESPN on that Saturday where the crap hit the fan, that is critical to understanding how this media narrative exploded the way that it did.
Okay, we're going to kind of move on, but it just made me think about something. I went to University of Colorado, and we always played Nebraska. Do you know what this was the standing comment there. Do you know what the N on their helmet stands for? Knowledge.
What's that?
Knowledge.
Yeah, very good.
My buddy Andy said, who is Ziegler's favorite sports radio broadcaster?
Sports radio broadcaster. I'd have to think about that. My favorite sportscaster of all time is a guy I worked for a brief period back when I was at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. Nationally, he's probably not very well known, but his name was Glenn Brenner. He was the CBS sports anchor in Washington, D.C., and this guy was a flat-out genius. A flat-out genius. I have worked with a few people in my life, only a few, that I was in awe of, and this guy I was in awe of. He was the funniest, greatest entertainer, in my view, in the history of sports television. Unfortunately, he tragically died only a few years after I worked with him as an intern. In fact, the Washington Redskins, if you're still allowed to say Redskins, dedicated their Super Bowl season to him because he died right in the middle of that run. But as far as a sports talk show host, I am so critical of talk show hosts, having been one myself as a radio talk show host. It's really hard, especially in this era where almost all talk show hosts are frauds to some level.
Right.
It's very difficult for me to endorse anybody. I mean, Colin Cowherd, I think says some things that I agree with. I think he's okay, but I think he's, the last several years, I think he's been way too PC and boring. I have to think about that. I mean, I haven't thought about a sports radio talk show host that I like in a long time. I actually was a sports radio talk show host at WIP in Philadelphia.
Oh, okay.
And I thought that Angelo Cataldi, who's the morning show host at WIP, he's just retiring now, who was at one point a huge fan of mine. I used to think he was really great. Not as brilliant as Glenn Brenner, but it was a similar vibe, but he screwed me over in an enormous way. And I actually think he's as much as a fraud as anybody else. So I would take him off of any particular list, but I think that WIP understands how to do sports talk radio probably better than anybody. Not that it's legitimate. I mean, it's mostly manipulative. But and their boss is a person I hated with all the passion in the world. Guy who was there when I was there, Tom Bigby, is probably one of the worst human beings I've ever run across in my life. But thankfully, he's dead now, so I don't have to worry about him.
So what's interesting? I'm 51. I'm not sure how old you are. You're probably a smidge older than me.
I'm 55.
Okay, so we're close in age then. And growing up, my dad big into sports, and so we would always listen to like baseball games on the radio, football, what have you. Chick Hearn on for basketball as an example. And so these legendary people, and then you probably have been able to get to know some of these broadcasters, and you just talked some smack about some of them you didn't like. Is it difficult? Because I never got to have the broadcasters kind of like meet them and find out they're trash. Is that difficult in some senses, or is it kind of relieving for you?
Well, like you, I mean, when I grew up, I was in awe of a lot of these sportscasters. I mean, I went to bed most nights as a kid in the Philadelphia area listening to Harry Callis and Richie Ashburn do Philadelphia Phillies games on the radio. That's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a sportscaster when I grew up. I was a sportscaster for a short period of time in television in 2 different television markets in Ohio and in North Carolina. I have gotten to know a lot of these people on both the news and the sports side. Most of the time I've been pretty disappointed. I mean, this probably would shock people, but I haven't done it recently, but I text with Bob Costas on a fairly regular basis. Matt Lauer and I are, I think, very close friends. I would consider him one of my top 5 friends in the world, which is bizarre. There are other people within that realm that I certainly know of. As far as I mean, look, I have become such a cynic. Would you put
Bob Costas in that realm then? You didn't mention him as far as radio.
Well,
sports.
Bob Costas is a great sportscaster in my opinion. And he's a very funny guy. By the way, Matt Lauer is a very funny guy. I think Matt Lauer might be funnier than Bob Costas, which I never would have told you, based upon their on-air persona. Sure. But in real life, I think Matt Lauer is funnier than Bob Costas. I'll go on record for that. No, Bob Costas is somebody I have enormous respect for as far as his talent. I think he got a lot of criticism for his play-by-play most recently in the playoffs, but I enjoyed listening to him again. I felt like it was a throwback to the golden era. Bob and I I've even tried to convince Bob, maybe he'll do it, I don't know, to do a show on his HBO show, which I told him to call Last of the Mohicans, which is to have him, Jim Nantz, and Al Michaels all together talking about how sportscasting has changed so dramatically.
I thought you were going to say the last Redskins game. Would that be the inappropriate name? Okay.
I don't think Bob would go for that because Bob is pretty PC and pretty liberal.
Well, I tried.
But I do think that those are the last of the Mohicans, the last of the golden age of sportscasters, Costas, Nantz, and Al Michaels. And once they're gone, it's over. And it's not because there's no good sportscasters anymore. It's because the business has changed now to a point where you cannot be a Bob Costas. You cannot be a Jim Nantz. You cannot be an Al Michaels. Al Michaels, he did many, many, many big games, but obviously he'll forever be known for Do You Believe in Miracles with the 1980 U.S. Olympic hockey team, which, by the way, was a game that was not even aired live. Not even aired live. And to this day, here we are 42 years later, and it's still iconic. Yeah. Now, that's never going to happen again. It's never going to happen again because we don't live in that world. We live in a world where 5 minutes after the Super Bowl is over, we talk about who's going to win next year. I mean, and so you can't make that mark. You can't make a mark anymore because the audiences aren't large enough. And our society moves on so quickly that you can never become an iconic figure. I mean, when I grew up, and granted, we didn't have, there was 1/100th the amount of sports on television there is today, maybe 1,000th of the sports that were on television today. But I would have been able to tell you just within 2 seconds of listening to any broadcaster's voice what their name was. And that's not an exaggeration. Within 2 seconds, I could have told you anybody on network television what their name was. I'm not sure I can name one other than the people that I just mentioned to you. I mean, the people that are, Mike Tirico would obviously be in that category. But I mean, we're talking about a handful now.
David says Paul Allen is the best radio broadcaster. Is that true?
The guy from the Vikings who's all of a sudden
I'm not sure. He's from up there, so he's biased.
Yeah, I mean, there's a video of him broadcasting the game against the Bills, which I'll say ensures that he will have a job for the rest of his life because it went viral and it's a tremendous video. I was in awe of his ability to do what he did under those circumstances, and it's a fantastic video if you check it out online.
Yeah, and speaking of the Bills, their game's getting snowed out this week. A friend of mine online, Toad, he's upset. Maybe he's because it's betting issues. Is that the pussification of the NFL or legit?
Well, look, last I checked, I don't know whether or not Buffalo is really going to get the 60-some inches of snow that was forecasted, but they obviously got a ton already. I saw it this morning. Look, nobody loves a good snow football game more than me. And I am absolutely in the category of people who believes that the NFL has become completely, in football in general, has become completely wussified to a degree that I believe football will not be recognizable. I mean, literally will not be recognizable in 5 to 10 years at its current rate. But I will say, look, if you can't get people to the game, if it's that bad, then that's a problem. And frankly, the way that I haven't looked detailed at the forecast, but it looked to me as if what you're going to have is 60 inches of snow on the ground and a windstorm on Sunday, but no actual snow falling at that time. So they would theoretically be able to get rid of the snow off the field. And it probably would be almost an absurdity from a competitive standpoint. The fact that they go to an indoor stadium in Detroit, I do find that depressing. I don't know enough about the logistics to know what the proper answer is, but I do know that they played a world championship game in Philadelphia a million years ago with who was the running back's name that was the star at that time. But this was back in the olden days where the snow was at least as bad as what they're going to have in Buffalo. And that's, no one died apparently. And that game is still remembered today, although I can't remember the name of the running back. Number 15 was his name. I'll look it up.
I'm blanking out as well. So I'm going to play a clip here. This kind of ties into, it's a clip from your podcast, and we'll just listen here. I think this is interesting. Let me know if you can't hear this, by the way.
And of course, obviously, this podcast is the death of journalism. And my disdain for the right-wing media is at times even worse than the left-wing media, because the right-wing media is nothing but a business designed as a cause to dupe people into giving them their money. And the so-called never Trump conservatives, they are the worst of the worst. I was part of this group. Liz, I would get up when Trump first went into office. I've never told this story publicly. There used to be these meetings in Washington, D.C. called the Meeting of the Concerned. That's what they called it. And this was the Bill Kristols of the world and, what was left of the never Trump conservative world in Washington, D.C. And I got invited to be in it via the internet because I live in Los Angeles. And I would get up at some ridiculous hour in the morning because these meetings were early to participate in these things. And these people were freaking nuts. They were completely insane. They thought that they thought they were going to get the 24th Amendment against Trump, and they thought that they could get a presidential candidate that could beat him in a primary. And like, you people are insane. You have no touch with reality whatsoever. And all of them, when COVID hit, turned out to be complete and total frauds. And so I find, you.
Okay, we'll stop it there. I thought that was fascinating. Maybe you want to explain your political stance first. And do you think that's something more journalists should do? Like say where they sit before they tell you where they stand?
Yeah, by the way, the running back was Steve Van Buren, who I always get mixed up with Norm Van Brocklin, who was an Eagles quarterback later on. And the snow game was 1948. It's still to this day called the Blizzard Bowl. All right. So as far as I have extremely unique political views. I am a conservative libertarian who has despised Donald Trump for decades. I explain why in great detail in episode number 9 of the Death of Journalism, which we just dropped on this past yesterday, as we talked today, and it deals with very close ties that my father had in business with Donald Trump, and where I have met with Donald Trump very, very briefly backstage at the Today Show back in 2014, and then followed him for decades. And long story short, I believe I have a distinction. I could be wrong. If I am wrong, please, someone out there tell me. But I believe that I am the only conservative in America, of a public commentator, conservative, who has been consistently anti-Trump throughout the entire Trump era, which I'll say started in the late summer of 2015. who has also been very fair to him and defended him at times when he deserved it and when he was getting unfair attacks from the news media, and where he did a few good things, like, for instance, standing by Brett Kavanaugh. I applauded him tremendously for that, because no other president would have had the guts to do that. I'm the only conservative who's a public commentator who has been anti-Trump, but fair to him, and who also did not cave when COVID hit. I'm the only one that I'm aware of. And the reason why all the others caved when COVID hit is because they were frauds. Because what really happened with the Never Trump crowd is that they realized they basically backed the wrong horse. They thought he wasn't going to win, and by the time the train left the building, they were left behind holding their bags, and so they had no place to go, and so they had only one option to remain relevant and to still get on television and to maybe still scrounge out some sort of a life, being able to feed themselves, to make any money whatsoever. And that was to appeal to left-wing media and left-wing, users, content users, whether it's their Twitter feed or whatever. So they become hostage to left-wing nuts. These are people that were conservatives their whole lives, but now their job is to do a minstrel show for liberals. That's what it is. That is not a hyperbole. It's a minstrel show. Dance for us, you former Republicans, to show us liberals how right we are, because we've deemed you to be the good Republicans, the good conservatives, and to be a good conservative, you must give us what we want. You must show us how wonderful we are, how smart we are for realizing that Donald Trump is the next Hitler, and for being liberals that we are. And that was tenable. That was tenable because, let's face it, there's a lot of reasons to be anti-Trump if you're a conservative, at least if you're a real conservative like me, who on a principle basis had a huge problem with Trump in a lot of different areas. But when that became untenable was when COVID hit. And every single one of these Never Trump conservatives revealed themselves as total frauds because they immediately continued the minstrel show of everything the liberals said about shutdowns and masks and later on vaccines and closing schools. Every bit of it was right. Every single bit of it. Why? Not because they believed it. None of them believed it. I would like to believe they didn't believe it. I don't think they believed it. But they knew that's what their audience didn't just want. It's what they demanded. What they demanded. Because if they get kicked out of that little club, then it's really over. Yeah. There's no place to go. There's no place to go. And I, as I think I proved on the Penn State Paterno Sandusky story, I don't care. I do not care. I often loathe my own audience. I will tell people who are supporters of me on Twitter to go F yourself.
Right.
I do not care. I do not care. I am here as a vessel of the truth for whatever that's worth. And unfortunately, it's not worth very much because we're living in a world where the truth doesn't matter anymore. Truth is not the coin of the realm. Popularity is. Having a cult that's on your side is where it's really at, where the money is. And so that's never been my thing. That will never be my thing. Much to my wife's chagrin, that's not my thing. And but I do have that distinction. I mean, do you know of anybody else who fits the description that I just described?
Well, I was trying to think, there's like Glenn Beck, but he's gone over to full being on Trump. So, I mean, the ones that weren't really.
Glenn and I had very long conversations, both publicly and privately, about this issue. And we almost had therapy sessions for each other. In fact, I think maybe 12 people saw it, but I think maybe my favorite TV show I've ever done was on The Blaze in studio with Glenn. Just after
it looked like the White House.
Well, they had another studio where he did a separate show. This was not part of his regular radio show. I did do the White House thing. I think they had changed it a little bit.
I've seen you on there a bunch, so I was just trying.
Okay, but this was a show that just aired on The Blaze just after Trump was inaugurated, and at that point his audience had been obliterated because he still wasn't on the Trump train, and obviously the entire conservative Republican movement was on the Trump train.
Right.
And we talked for, I don't know how long it was on this show, but I think the only place that still exists is on my DVR. Because I mean, this was tremendous. This was basically two guys doing a therapy session for each other about where we are in the era of Trump. And look, I like Glenn. I respect his talent. I don't agree with his overall position and where it evolved to on Trump, but I have always said I understand it because Glenn was in a unique position. I give Glenn a bit of a dispensation, and it's not just because we were friends or are friends or I occasionally go on his show. It's because he had people who needed him to survive so they could feed their families. In other words, he had a lot of people working for him. And that's a different set of obligations. If it's just you, right? That's the way it is for most talk show hosts. It's just them by and large. There's not a lot of people that are relying on them other than their family. And so when you have other people lots of other people at one point with the Blaze that need you to be able to feed their families, then I'm sorry, I set a different bar when it comes to that. And I totally understand what he did, and it was probably the right decision.
Yeah, so I probably can't think of a prominent, talk radio or podcast or whatever that you're talking about. For me, when I'm just like you, Trump doesn't thrill me at all, but I don't hate him. So, the left wants you to just despise him. I'm not there with them. The never Trumpers want you, the same thing. So you can give credit where it's due, but you could also point out the faults and stuff. And actually, him becoming the main part for the Republicans, what kind of drove me to be a libertarian, honestly. So I was like, I'm kind of out. They can't be consistent. You are definitely consistent. That through line has kept you there, and obviously you're not grifting because I don't think you're doing the Sandusky stuff for the money. Is that okay,
of all the criticism I get? That's my favorite. And there are still people who try to claim that I'm doing this for the money, that this is a grift. I can assure you that the most hated man in America who's in prison, who has no money whatsoever and zero following other than people who are following him because of my work, there's no money in it whatsoever. And that's not why I've done it. I have purposely lost money. Until recently, we didn't even have ads on with the benefit of hindsight. We put ads on there, which was not my decision, but that was after a year of allowing people to listen to it without ads. I've never put any ads on my YouTube page, on our websites. I'm a terrible business guy. I would like to believe that somebody out there puts some extra credibility on what I say because I'm not beholden to advertising or grifting. But unfortunately, I don't think many people make that connection.
No, and my buddy Toad did actually join. We already answered this. NFL moving the Bills game. Is the league dead? And he's finally absolved for saying Sandusky is innocent. Okay, that's great. Let me play. Okay, let's talk about live golf. Okay, so just to back up, I'm an avid golfer myself. My brother-in-law does it. I have a bunch of nephews. They play college golf. One's a coach. They're fine with the live thing, and we've had this conversation. I know you're not. So I was goading you a little bit this morning. So I don't know. Why don't you tell the listeners, first of all, what the concept is about live golf, and then what your objection is to it. And then we'll go from there.
Well, it's funny that Trump is tangentially involved with the whole live golf thing, because my view on live golf is as nuanced as it is on Trump. And I'm a longtime golfer. I played golf at Georgetown University. I've played in a couple of national championships, USGA national championships. I played in the British mid-amateur championship. I've won some club championships all over the country. I'm currently about a 1 handicapper, maybe 2 on a bad day. And ironically, one of the reasons why my view on this, again, kind of going back to the advertising and going against self-interest, I have a reason to hate the PGA Tour. One of my first jobs was to work for the PGA Tour. I worked for PGA Tour Productions back in the olden days when they did one show a week on ESPN inside the PGA Tour. I moved down to Jacksonville, Florida, to work on that show. I knew on day one I was going to get fired. On day one, I called my father. I said, this is not going to work. I'm going to get fired. And he thought I was crazy. I said, no, it's not going to work. Because the mentality of the PGA Tour and my mentality were so completely inconsistent with one another. So I have no love for the PGA Tour. And by the way, to this day, I have great disdain for how they handle COVID. They get universal praise for how they handle COVID, when in fact, I think they handled COVID worse than anybody else, because they caved purely and totally out of political pressure because all the other sports had caved. Here they were in a unique position to be able to continue on, whether it was with crowds or not crowds. I mean, frankly, I think they should have never had anything change at all. And I think that we now know that. But the idea that they couldn't play golf. It was the safest place you could possibly be during COVID, was on the golf course. And they shut down for months. So I hate the PGA Tour for that. I hate the PGA Tour from what my personal experience with them having been fired. So with that as the context, I am a strong supporter of the PGA Tour in this fight against Live Golf. And it's not because Donald Trump is, helping to promote Live Golf. And I don't have anything against Greg Norman. And it's really not even much about the Saudis. You tweeted at me today trying to provoke me that somehow I didn't even understand what your point was about.
I'll go over it. That's okay.
Okay. Well, the PGA Tour, I believe, has made a mistake strategically in pinning a lot of their argument against the Live Tour, which is funded by Saudi Arabia, on the fact that this is a morality issue.
Yes.
That you can't do this because you're helping to sports wash the crimes of the Saudi Arabian regime. And look, I'm no fan of Saudi Arabia. They've been screwing us over in oil for decades, and they absolutely are, as Phil Mickelson said, nasty motherfuckers, or whatever the phrase that he used was. And so I'm not a fan of the Saudis, but that's not my objection. My objection to Live Golf is basically what it's going to do to golf, which is already in my mind in danger. I mean, I can't stand what has happened to professional golf. And this gets into a very long critique and dissertation, but
we'll narrow it. What's the problem with it now, and what does having Live Golf competition, in a sense, do to destroy it? And is this like the USFL or XFL? Because with money,
I think since you're a golfer who appears to be rational, I can convince you with this line of argument that Live is evil. Okay. All right. Here's why Live is evil. The essence of tournament golf has always been fear. That and unfortunately, technology has taken away almost all fear from professional golf. I mean, it was not that long ago. I mean, when Jack Nicklaus played golf, even Jack Nicklaus, the greatest player maybe ever, when he played, he had at least a little bit of fear that, you know what, if I make a bad swing here, this ball's going to go off the planet, or I might pop it up, or I might even ground one. There was the fear of humiliation at any moment. That is gone now because of technology.
He did hit a 1-iron like 247 to win over Palmer, though, right? I mean, that's, I don't know, what was that? 1967 or something like that?
I've already suggested that Jack is, up until Tiger, the greatest player of all time. What I'm saying is that part of what made the sport interesting was that at any moment you could have a Jean Van de Velde situation.
Yes.
At the British Open, okay? Technology has effectively, to some almost fully, not 100%, has taken that away. So fear is an endangered species on the PGA Tour. The scoring is off the charts. You got to basically shoot 16 to 20 under on a bad week to have any chance of winning a tournament, which to me is boring as hell. I find that kind of golf boring to watch on television because to me, the excitement of it is seeing guys face their fears and either win or lose in that battle. Okay, so that's the premise. Now, how does Live play into that? Live just killed the last bit of fear in professional golf because now we have a situation where the Saudis are giving millions and millions of dollars to these golfers who now no longer give a damn what the hell happens on the golf course, because they are set not just for life, they are set for multiple lives, and it doesn't matter how they play. There's not even a damn cut. So now they get to play in effectively these 3-day member guests, making millions and millions of dollars, way more than Jack Nicklaus ever made in his entire career, even though obviously the dollar was very different then. And this is going to trickle down now through every aspect of professional golf, because guess what? The PGA Tour just lost all leverage to testing their players in a way that the players don't like. You think, remember, I don't know if you remember last year, Bay Hill, right? Bay Hill on the weekend was nearly impossible to play. All right. And the players were bitching and moaning like you couldn't believe, because, oh my gosh, we didn't shoot 20 under to win that week. And they were, their panties were all in a bunch. Do you think there's any chance in the world Bay Hill is going to be set up there that way this year?
No.
Do you think there's any chance in the world that?
No.
Zero. Yeah. Zero. They will never, ever do that again. Guess what? Because no one will play. And even if they stay on the PGA Tour, they'll stay away from Bay Hill, because now there's so much money, they don't need to play Bay Hill. They can do whatever the hell they want. You know where else? You know what else is going to talk about wussified NFL? The USGA is in the same boat. The US Open used to be the toughest test in golf. No. The US Open has completely lost its balls. It's been losing its balls for years. They got him back for half a year at Shinnecock, and everyone had a meltdown. And even Zach Johnson, who I used to respect before he did this, declared on that Saturday that they had lost the golf course, which was not true. And of course the USGA immediately backed down and went away from who they were. Well, that's only going to get worse now, because the players have all the leverage. The inmates are running the asylum, and LIV is the engine that is deciding all that, and has stuck a stake through the heart of what used to be the essence of professional or competitive golf. And it's only going to get worse. And by the way, I've had a very complicated relationship with Tiger Woods. He used to be his fan, then a big detractor, and then I loved his comeback. And then, he looked like he was coming in on a white horse to save the day with the PGA Tour. I've now turned on what Tiger's doing. I actually think what Tiger has done in response to LIV is that he has seen that the tour is very vulnerable. I think Mark Steinberg, his very, very smart and financially savvy agent, realized that the PGA Tour was ripe for a hostile takeover. And Tiger Woods and Rory McIlroy have effectively done that, because the tour lost all leverage. And now they're going to do these crazy Monday night golf events indoors that I have all sorts of problems with. And so, look, I realize I'm a boomer, and or that's what they call me online, so I must be. And I'm an old fogey, and the world has passed me by. But golf was supposed to be different. Golf was supposed to be the sport that was most attached to its essence and its traditions, and that's gone, and it's going fast. And I think if LIV survives, then it's completely over. And
what
so
about
that's
the take? Oh, go ahead.
Did I convince you at all?
Well, kind of. So, and by the way, you're not wrong at all what you're saying, and I see your concept. And by the way, as you should have. Now, I don't know that the PGA could have used your logic, because they would have to say, instead of trying to use the moral outrage, they would have to say our product's got a problem, and they're not willing to do that. So the best thing I've always loved about golf, besides the sponsors you get on the side, is you have to top 120 to make the next year. You've got to make your nut by winning tournaments. So it's that ultra capitalist win at all costs.
Meritocracy.
Yeah, rather than I'm just I get a big contract and I sit aside. Now the problem you're seeing is that's going to be with LIV, right? And so that's exactly what you're doing. But if that's going to be, like, as an example, I'm not going to watch LIV if it's just a nobody out there shooting, and Phil Mickelson's not, or the big stars, DJ, are not producing, then it's not going to, it's going to go away like the USFL or these other things. I know the money is still going to be there.
Let me stop you.
No,
let me stop you there. Hold on.
The viewership.
See, this is the other argument. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but this is important.
No, it's fine.
Because as a libertarian conservative, I get a lot of people attacking me saying, "Oh, don't you believe in the free market? And shouldn't the market determine this?" No. This is not a free market. This is the most contrived market on the planet. This is an entity with unlimited resources, spending as much money as they want, not to build a business, but to destroy an institution. They are trying to destroy golf. And who's motivating them? Greg Norman and Donald Trump, who are both making money from them, as well as living out their lifelong vendettas against the PGA Tour. This is a vengeance tour being funded by oil money to destroy golf as we know it. And that's why I'm against LIV.
Gotcha. So I didn't know if that was what you're reasoning for, and I think you're articulating it with passion, the way we'd like John Ziegler to do. I know my big problem with some of the contention, and as you pointed out, is the moral outrage. So Saudi Arabia is bad. I think they're horrible. They've done all kinds of bad stuff that we're just letting go aside. Rory McIlroy comes out and says, "Oh, these guys are just doing this for money," but he'll play in China. News people are saying, "Oh, would you play for anybody? To the LIV guys, would you play for Putin?" And I'm like, but they play for China. China is just, they're not attacking Ukraine right now, but they're not to be absolved for any of this. So that was my reasoning. Now we come out, Khashoggi or whatever, the journalist was killed by the Saudi prince supposedly, and Biden is giving him sovereign immunity. So do you see that there's any kind of problems with the PGA or the players that rip on all the LIV players because of the Saudi thing, but now they're playing in the States where we're fine with Americans getting killed by the Saudi prince?
Well, first of all, I very strongly disagree with what Biden did.
I agree.
But I don't see the analogy here because, as I told you on Twitter, the analogy would require that the PGA Tour was funded solely by the United States government.
Do they not get money though from China when they go play over there? All the players.
No, but that's not
It's similar.
No, it's not similar at all.
Okay.
LIV is a tour that was created by and is fully funded by the Saudi Arabian government. The PGA Tour, while it's located in Jacksonville, Florida, is not a solely owned subsidiary of the United States government, which is what LIV is with regard to Saudi Arabia. You're comparing apples and oranges here. I didn't even understand. I thought you were kidding with me actually when you made that analogy.
Well, yes, of course I'm being sarcastic in a sense, but you don't see at all a problem from a player's perspective, like a Rory McIlroy, who will say, "I would not."
Here's what I think. If they're going to be consistent, here's what I think. If they're going to be consistent, and again, I've already articulated that the Saudi issue is about number 10 on my list of problems with LIV. But if you're one of those people that have been saying that Saudi Arabia is your biggest problem with LIV, and maybe Rory is one of those, I think Rory certainly has been very much on that particular issue, then I think to be consistent, you should be ripping Joe Biden. That's what I think you should do.
Yeah.
I think you should rip Joe Biden for what he did. Does that mean that you can't be on the PGA Tour? That's nonsensical.
Of course,
because it's not the same. It's not the same situation.
Of course, and hey, I told you I was working this one out. But my point is, there's a lot of hypocrisy going through there. And by the way, this is why I wanted to, in a sense, goad you on here, because I'm not stuck either way. But I wanted to get your explanation because I just knew following you along, it wasn't going to be. The Saudi was not going to be the reason. And by the way, the love of the sport, I get it. And I think that's very commendable. So that's good. Let's go on to, did you have any more LIV comments you wanted to make before?
Wherever you want to go, I'll go.
Okay. So I've also heard you talk a little bit about Lance Armstrong. So my background is I used to race professionally. I raced against, when I say against, I was really like minor leagues compared to Lance, but in the same realm. And in that day and age, I wasn't the drug person, so I didn't get any success. What have you done with the Lance story yourself? Because I know you're legendary journalist. You're all over the board.
So you're just asking me out of curiosity. You don't know anything that I've ever said or done about this.
I remember you talking about it, but goddamn, you had so much in your podcast, John.
Okay.
When you talked about it at the time, it's been a while.
Here's why I talked about it in our With the Benefit of Hindsight podcast, and here's why it became relevant. Because I found it fascinating that the two journalists who stood by, quote unquote journalists, who stood by Lance Armstrong longer than anybody else, Sally Jenkins and Buzz Bissinger. I mean,
Sally Jenkins, yeah.
What did I say?
No, Sally Jenkins. I totally know who she is. Yes.
Okay. Sally Jenkins and Buzz Bissinger.
Yeah.
They stayed with Lance Armstrong. Talk about the last of the Mohicans. I mean, they stayed way past everybody else. And Buzz Bissinger wrote a cover story for Newsweek that said, "Why I still believe in Lance Armstrong after the whole damn world that had any rational thought knew that he was a fraud." And the reason why I found that relevant is Sally Jenkins and Buzz Bissinger turned out to be two of Joe Paterno's biggest critics. And I found that both fascinating as well as telling, because these two people are frauds who are easily fooled. And with regard to Sally Jenkins, I don't know if this will ring any bells, but I find this story fascinating. So before I got involved with the Joe Paterno story, Sally, this would have been like 2010, I think. You can check when her book came out. But she wrote a book about Lance Armstrong, basically a BJ book, because she's in love with the guy, because he was a media darling then, the whole Live Strong charity, and everyone loves Lance Armstrong. So she writes this book, and by 2010, I had already been saying on my radio show for years, I know nothing about cycling, but there's no way he's not cheating. There's no way he's not cheating. All you have to know is he's got, he survives testicular cancer, and he becomes the big winningest cyclist in history. Almost not out of nowhere, but in a way that was surprising to a lot of people who were experts in the sport. And what also got my antenna up and my spidey senses is his focus on this charity. Now, I have nothing against charities, but it looked to me as if he was building this charity as a force field against people who would criticize him for potential doping. So here we are years after I'm already convinced Lance Armstrong is a fraud. And Sally Jenkins puts out this BJ book about Lance Armstrong, and she's doing an online chat about it. And so I got nothing better to do that day. I decide I'm going to participate in this online chat. And I asked Sally Jenkins, and I'm paraphrasing, but basically my question to Sally Jenkins was, Sally, has it ever occurred to you that Live Strong was created because Lance Armstrong knows he's guilty as hell and needs to create force field protection so that the media will leave him alone on this and not criticize him because of fear of bringing down the charity? That was basically the question. And her response was, again, paraphrasing, but this is etched in my memory, that's the most cynical and ridiculous thing I have ever heard in my entire career. That's what she says to me. This is a Washington Post reporter who is certain that my hypothesis, my theory on this is completely and totally wrong. And she scoffs at me and mocks me. Who turned out to be right? Who turned out to be right?
Yeah.
I was right. She was wrong. Just like with Paterno, I was right. She was wrong.
When did
She's
you come
an idiot.
when did you come to what year did you start to think that this was an issue, that Lance was a fraud? And by the way, in the cycling world, we called it the cancer shield.
The cancer shield. Well, cancer shield plus the Live Strong shield.
Well, the cancer was the Live Strong Foundation. Yeah.
Right. But obviously, those work as two prongs. I mean, once as a cancer survivor, you get a certain amount of PC protection. I like to liken it to the old space shuttle where they had the heat shields so that you can re-enter the atmosphere and not blow up and not, when it works properly. Cancer was one shield, and then the charity was another shield. And Lance built these shields because he knew he was going to be in trouble at some point because he knew he was guilty as hell. I would say, based upon my memory, I started talking about this on my radio talk show in Los Angeles at KFI in 2005. And I remember people thought I was a bit off my rocker at that time. Not everybody, but it just never passed the smell test to me. And I'm somebody, I don't know anything about cycling.
Yeah.
I'm looking at this from the big picture. It doesn't make any sense. And when it doesn't make any sense and the media is buying it hook, line, and sinker, I automatically presume there's a problem. And by the way, I'm almost never wrong when those factors come together.
That's fascinating. And so me, who was in that world, I mean, when he first came back and then won, there was a lot of shockwaves. There was a lot of disbelievers. Some of that was jealousy, but immediately, and then the media didn't want to talk about it, unlike you were doing. And except there was a British reporter, I'm trying to remember his name, that really came out, and he got shunned, sued. I think he worked for The Guardian. And they made a movie and stuff about it, but good job for you. Sally Jenkins, she's still in contact with you about Sandusky?
No. Although I think you might be mixing her up with her friend Christine Brennan, who is somebody who I was in contact a great deal with on Sandusky, who I used to actually dated for about 15 minutes, right. And who is completely and totally wrong, and is much like Sally Jenkins, is a very PC liberal who buys every narrative in which she's able to virtue signal. And Lance Armstrong was a virtue signal story. Let's be clear. I mean, you're signaling your virtue by supporting Lance Armstrong, because if you don't support Lance Armstrong, you're in favor of cancer. And by the way, Lance Armstrong basically said that at certain points during this. I mean, not verbatim, but you'll remember there were times in which he basically said to his critics, "Look what you're going to do to the charity if you bring me down." That's a pretty decent paraphrase. And that's when I knew for sure this whole thing was a fraud, because you're the last bastion of scoundrels right there.
Where's your line between skepticism and cynicism? I mean, do you flip flop in between those two, or do you try not to be too cynical at times?
My rule is I actually give everyone the benefit of the doubt until I can prove them guilty. Which, by the way, is not a great strategy for, pursuing your own self-interest, because let's be clear, when you give a liar the benefit of the doubt, you give them a head start in the race, right? Because if the liar automatically gets off the blocks while you're still going, okay, that might be true. It doesn't maybe seem true, but I'm not going to call it out as a lie because I can't prove it yet. And we saw that, by the way, on COVID. I mean, the COVID forces not only got out of the blocks, they were out of the stadium before most people who had a rational brain started going, wait a minute, what the hell are you telling us here? And by then it was too late. And so it's not a great strategy strategically, but from a truth standpoint, I don't like rushing to judgment either. I mean, there are probably some people who think, oh, Ziegler will always take the contrarian position on everything. That's actually not true. I actually get attacked a lot for not taking the quote unquote contrarian position when people think that I should. Like, for instance, I'm positive Jeffrey Epstein killed himself in prison. Now, for lunatics out there, that actually discredits me to a lot of people, which is insane that I have that position. I'm also quite positive that Paul Pelosi was not attacked by his gay lover 10 days before the midterm election. But for a lot of people, especially on the conservative side, that actually is a discrediting lack of rushing to judgment.
What about
in the contrarian position?
Voter credibility, or the election credibility for 2020?
Where am I on that?
Yeah.
I believe that Joe Biden was the elected president. I believe that to the extent that the election was stolen, it was stolen by the news media using COVID as a weapon to not just destroy Donald Trump's credibility, but also to change the way we do our elections. Yeah. I can't stand mail-in balloting. I hate everything about it. And it's not just because I think it benefits Democrats, and I hate Democrats, especially post-COVID. I actually used to have a lot of friends that were Democrats, including the Democratic chairman of the House Budget Committee, John Yarmuth, was a very good friend of mine before COVID hit. We used to host a TV show together in Louisville, Kentucky. So but I now hate Democrats, and that's not the only reason I hate mail-in balloting. I think mail-in balloting is terrible in every possible way, but I do believe quote unquote stolen. There's any evidence of that, and I think would be plenty of evidence of it if it actually happened that way.
Yeah. So what was interesting from the 2020 election, there was a lot of lawsuits out there and they were thrown out and people like, there's proof of, that nothing nefarious happened. What was interesting is there was a lawsuit in California that Kevin Kiley brought before the election, and it removed some of the voting problems that the Newsom and them were trying to put in play because you had to bring them before they ripened, in a sense. And a lot of those suits that brought afterwards were about, certain civil rights and voting issues, and the courts kicked them out because you didn't bring them in time. And I think that's a lot on Trump, in a sense. So I think, yes, the election, there's always going to be some fraud going here. But what thought made me think, and by the way, everyone should go listen to your last, the death of journalism, especially episode 8. You break down the elections. I really enjoyed that. You talked about Kerry Lake and some of the other things. What's your take with my feeling with, you saw Ron DeSantis just kill in Florida. And I think the reason being was he could say, while he wasn't the greatest on the lockdown and the COVID to begin with, when the light was shown on him, a lot from the Democrats as well, he stepped back and said, fine, I'm freeing up everything. And then he could run on it. Kerry Lake goes and runs on voter fraud, which, if they just had focused on COVID, maybe it would have resolved things. What's your take on that?
Well, I said before the election on The Blaze with Stu, Glenn Beck's co-host, I said that I think there's going to be a weird phenomenon here where both lockdown governors and free state governors are going to be rewarded for their stance, which sounds kind of crazy and counterintuitive, but it turned out to be right. And the reason why it turned out to be right is that during COVID, you became invested in whatever path you took. In other words, if you took the quote unquote safer path or the freer path, you wanted that to be right. And it's kind of like with maskers, right? There is no chance you have of convincing a ardent masker that they wasted 2 years plus of their lives masking and forced their kids to mask for no reason. You cannot do that. It is not possible to do that. And there's literally nobody I've seen. I think there was one person on Twitter who actually admitted that I saw anyway, that they had made a mistake and they had been duped by masking. And why is that? Well, people are naturally stubborn and they don't want to admit they're wrong. But in this particular case, they invested so much in it. That's the big problem. And so taking this out of the theoretical into the practical, if you're in Florida and you enjoyed the fruits of your freedom and it turned out just fine, you're going to reward DeSantis, not just because he made your life better than you saw elsewhere around the country, but because you took that risk with him. And I think the main thing that DeSantis did that other so-called freedom governors didn't, like for instance, Kemp won in Georgia. Yeah. By a decent margin over Stacey Abrams, but it is my perception, and I live in California, so I don't know this 100%, but I follow the news very, very closely. It is my perception that Kemp, who actually opened up before DeSantis did and took crap from Trump for doing so, that basically what Kemp did was open up, hope for the best, and not make it an every single day issue like DeSantis did. And I think DeSantis benefited because I think he did what he effectively deputized his supporters. And that's a kind of a strange way to look at this, but he kind of deputized his supporters with the facts and with the real science and the real information on which his decisions were made. He didn't just sit back. I think there was this perception, and I understood it. I think there was this perception upon Republicans. We don't need to talk about COVID lockdowns because those that are against it are going to be on our side no matter what we do. So let's not aggravate the other side. Let's not poke the bear and make this an issue about, because there's some independents that really aren't sure. And maybe they actually liked some of the COVID restrictions, and they thought they were safer that way. So we're going to try to have our cake and eat it too. We're going to get credit for opening up from the people who really hated the lockdowns, but we're not going to get penalized by people who didn't. DeSantis, probably because he was in a state where he didn't have any choice because the media wanted to destroy him. I mean, Florida is a different animal than anywhere else. The media went on a search and destroy mission for DeSantis because Florida was making them look bad. That's what happened here. Yeah. Florida was a threat to their entire credibility. If Florida survived, then everything we were being told was wrong. So they threw everything they had at him, and it forced DeSantis to go on the offense and to say, no. Let me tell you why masks don't work. Let me tell you why schools need to be open. And I'm going to do this on a daily basis, and I'm not going to back down. And I'm going to, we were wrong for a couple of weeks, but we turned it around. And I think that's why DeSantis got rewarded when some of the others did not as much. Kristi Noem in South Dakota. Now, granted, it's a very Republican state, but she won big as well. And
she never locked down.
And she was maybe the best governor there was on the lockdowns. And South Dakota never locked down. And, and she, in my perception, handled it similarly in a public fashion to the way that DeSantis did, which is don't back down, don't apologize, go on the offense. And unfortunately, I think Republicans made a mistake in general in not attacking on this issue. And now I understand why they didn't. The media was never going to give them a fair shake. The media is completely and totally invested in every COVID restriction there is. But can you imagine how these midterms would have been different if just two simple, obvious facts had been accepted by the American public? That masks do not work and the vaccines do not stop transmission. Those are two fights that the science is 1,000% on the so-called conservative side. And if that fight had been fought and won, I believe Democrats would have been wiped out in this particular midterm. If that had been, now that would have been a tough mountain to climb with the media against you, but you had the facts on your side. And that was a fight that Republicans were afraid to do, unlike DeSantis did. DeSantis took on that fight and he got rewarded in a big way.
Yeah, and that was my point. And when you take on the Carrie Lake, I don't know what else she had, but it seemed like election fraud was all it is. You're literally telling the other side, you think the masks are divisive, you're telling the other side, you cheated specifically, or you're a part of the cheating side. So it's a weird aspect to kind of take on. Anyway, what is your prediction for 2024 presidential candidates, left and right? And are we going to see pretty boy Gavin, your buddy, and DeSantis? Is that going to be the heads up?
Look, you see this pinky right here? If you said, John, will you give up this pinky right now? If it's DeSantis versus Newsom in 2024, I'd say where can I go to get it chopped off? Just tell me right now. I can play golf. I can play golf.
Did that right? Didn't he just cut his finger off before a game?
I can play golf just fine without my left pinky. Okay, and I'm married with kids, so 10 fingers or 9 fingers is fine. 10 is not necessary, but I might even give both pinky. I'm interlocking grips. I can't give this pinky, but I would probably give 2 digits if you negotiated with me to have Newsom versus DeSantis as the presidential matchup in 2024. Because even as pessimistic as I am about the state of the country, and as how much I know that the news media is completely in the tank at all levels for Democrats, I am positive that DeSantis would beat Newsom. And there's a very good chance that DeSantis would beat Newsom like a drum. It could theoretically, if things broke the right way, if it turned out that way, we could be talking about, Ronald Reagan, 1984 landslide type situation. Not to that extent, because obviously you can't win Illinois, probably can't win New York, although maybe New York is in play after this.
You've taken Florida from being a swing state now. I mean, it's definitely, right. It seems red.
But look, but let me just say, part of the reason why I feel comfortable saying I'll give up a pinky or two is it's not going to happen that way. First of all, nothing that spectacular ever occurs in this country anymore. The last great thing that's I'm convinced the last great thing that'll ever happen in this country was Tiger winning the 2019 Masters. After that, that was it. We're done. We shot our wad. It's all over. It's all downhill from there. And so, look, I don't believe that. I believe that DeSantis could win the nomination if it was DeSantis versus Trump, head to head, right? I believe DeSantis would beat Trump in the Republican primary. I believe he would win that battle. However, it would be a war to end all wars. And at the end of it, the nomination would be virtually worthless because Trump would sabotage DeSantis because he's that small. He's that much of a narcissist and his life is that much about vengeance. So there's no scenario that I can see where Megyn Kelly said this best, and it didn't get as much publicity as it should have. But really, the only scenario left for America to survive is for Trump to have a heart attack and die. That's the only scenario. That's the only scenario we have right now is for Trump to die of natural causes, ideally on live television, because if he didn't do it on live television, all his followers would think that he was assassinated or that he didn't really die. He was still alive.
You're just giving the Clintons ideas now. That's all you're doing. Well,
and I'm only being partially facetious here. By the way, I'm not hoping for that to happen. And if it happens, I'm not responsible for it, at least not that you know of. But the reality is that if Trump lives, then there's no hope. Because there's no way to get the Republican nomination to a place where it's viable in a general election. So the most likely scenario, I mean, there's two mostly scenarios. DeSantis wins a nomination that's worthless, or Trump wins a nomination that's almost worthless. I think the DeSantis people would probably vote for Trump anyway, just to prevent another Democratic term. I am not someone that believes that Joe Biden is going to be jettisoned. I think Joe Biden, if he wants to run again, is going to be the nominee. And for those that say, well, they're going to get rid of Biden because he's so old, and they can't have Harris because she's so unpopular. That is ridiculous. Have you been paying attention to the Democratic Party over the last 2 or 3 years? Fetterman. It is against their religion to take something away from a black female who is in line to make history. It is not possible. The moment that Gavin Newsom were to run against Harris, let's say Biden decides I'm not running and it's semi-open, right? For Newsom to run against Harris would be idiotic. And I think Harris is a terrible candidate. But can we look at where exactly is Gavin Newsom going to make his stand in a Democratic primary situation? Iowa? New Hampshire? You think the live free or die state is going to give Gavin Newsom votes over a black female who's in line to be the first female president? I mean, I realize these are the liberals that are going to be voting in these elections, and in Iowa the caucuses are extremely liberal. But even an Iowa liberal is more conservative than a San Francisco liberal, where Gavin Newsom is from. Then they go to South Carolina. Now, let me tell you, South Carolina is not going to vote for Gavin frickin' Newsom. There is no chance in the world that Gavin Newsom can win anything in South Carolina other than a hair gel contest. There's no chance. Then there's Florida. You really think that Gavin Newsom is going to win a primary in Florida?
Not after the ads he's done.
I mean, it's completely ridiculous. And then if he somehow makes it to California, he's running against the former senator from his own state.
Yeah.
I mean, so
but
he can't even win his own.
Look, Kamala already tried, and they did overlook her for Joe Biden and almost everybody else in the primaries. I mean, she was that bad.
But it's different. It's different now because she's vice president. It's different. It's totally different now. It's totally different because now she's in line and she's had experience of being vice president for 4 years. Look, would there be an element of the Democratic Party that would be like, oh, I'm not sure if Harris is really up to it, and maybe we can find someone better? Sure. Would in a national poll, this is a very different set of circumstances. If you took let's say Biden decides he's not going to run, right? And they start doing national polls between Newsom and Harris, okay? I can see where in a national poll, Newsom could beat Harris depending on, the nature of the poll and the timing and the circumstances. I don't know that. I can see that scenario. But when you get it down to brass tacks his only shot early on in a Democratic primary would be the Nevada caucuses. But frankly, I don't even think he would do that well in the Nevada caucuses, because those people see the craziness going on in California. They're like, whoa, wait a minute, that's too much for us. So I don't think there's a place where Gavin Newsom can stick his flag and win a big, a big race that actually matters. He'll get crushed in New Hampshire, crushed in South Carolina, crushed in Florida, and then it's over. So this idea that Gavin Newsom is going to be the nominee under the current circumstances, and where he's running against Harris and or Biden, he probably is hoping he's running against Biden, right? I mean, that would be, if I'm Newsom, he's hoping he runs against Biden, but having the balls to run against Biden it's a more difficult hurdle than running against Harris, because now you're running against an incumbent Democratic president, and there's going to be more resistance to that. So I just don't see the scenario where it can happen. As much as I said I would love to see DeSantis and Newsom go at it, because I believe DeSantis would hand him his lunch. I really do.
It would be entertaining, and when maybe you would have a better chance for DeSantis simply because you don't have the anti-Trump vote. I mean, the voting just because it's Trump. Let me, before we go out here, and I appreciate all the time you're giving us, let's do a little bit of your Jordan Peterson advice column here. What's Ziegler's biggest lesson he learned from his early journalistic career?
Wow, the biggest lesson? Well, I actually went into sportscasting at first because I thought, hilariously, in to do new political, I thought, boy, people must really know what they're talking about. And I guess the biggest lesson I learned is these people are all morons. In all seriousness, you cannot understand just how dumb people in the news media really are. They are idiots. They're complete morons. They have no courage. They have no ability to think outside the box. They go with the herd, and most of them are very disgraceful people. The vast majority of them, especially in my era and beyond, they went into this because they wanted to be famous. The women that went in were all, former prom queens who wanted to be prom, go to the prom every year and still relive their glory days. And the guys were, frankly, like me, were guys that, geeks that women never liked, and then they wanted to get laid by being on TV. I mean, that's why I went into sportscasting. Other than I love sports and loved sportscasting, was that I wanted to get laid.
It work?
And
did it work?
Yes, absolutely. It absolutely worked.
There you go, Andy.
So I mean,
that's your biggest takeaway.
You should see my wife. I mean, I have way out punted my coverage throughout my entire adult life when it came to dating, largely because I was in TV and radio broadcasting. I'm only being slightly facetious here. So look, the whole business is a fraud. It is now a total and complete fraud. These people are idiots, and they don't care about the truth. And all they care about is keeping their jobs. That's all they care about. Keeping the gig, because the gigs and the powerful ones are so incredibly cushy and so difficult to replace that no one wants to do anything to jeopardize them.
All right. I think that's great advice. John, why don't you tell everybody where they can find you? What do you got coming up? And what you specifically want them to check into, which is probably your newest podcast.
Well, yeah, I would ask people to go subscribe to both of our podcasts, which the one that's currently ongoing, we do twice a week. We release on Tuesdays and Thursdays. It's called The Death of Journalism with me and Liz Habib. So, and we got a great couple episodes coming up just before Thanksgiving, including an exclusive interview with the former president of Penn State University, Graham Spanier, which dovetails with our other podcast, With the Benefit of Hindsight, which is an epic true crime podcast that will absolutely blow your mind. So those are the two things that I'm most interested in people checking out: subscribing, rating, reviewing, and sharing, because they're amazing sources of truth that you can't get anywhere else.
I can't endorse your with benefit of hindsight enough. So it's really fantastic. And your new one with it. How do you like working with her? I like the fact that she doesn't just yes man you. She pushes back. Is that frustrating for you at times?
Well, I think I'm married to two different women simultaneously. Liz and I frustrate the hell out of each other at times. And yet, I probably have never had a professional relationship that has endured more situations where we have told each other to go F ourselves and not spoken for extended periods of time. I mean, it's the tension that you hear and feel on this podcast is not faked. It is 1,000% real. And I know there are some listeners that really find that great and are fascinated by it. I know there are others that sometimes find it more fascinating. It's something that we're working on to figure out the best way to make it work for everybody. I think Liz is tremendous. She's a great broadcaster. She's really smart. She at times is a great compliment to me because she gets me. I mean, she's known me for not all of 32 years, but we first worked together as she was a news anchor. I was a sports anchor at the NBC affiliate in Steubenville, Ohio, Wheeling, West Virginia, back in the early 90s. And it's just bizarre how fate has all worked out that here we are 32 years later working on our second podcast together. And because she moved to Los Angeles, I moved to Los Angeles. And, I think she provides an enormous amount of positive impact to the podcast. But of course, in any combustible relationship, you got to take the good with the bad. I released a video yesterday of an outtake of our most recent episode that, frankly, I thought was going to be more popular than it currently is, because it's an outtake of video. Our podcast is audio, but we tape the video that we don't use. And our producer, Mike Agavino, put out the outtake of me basically, I don't even know how to describe it, but I'm reacting to a situation where Liz and I are debating Donald Trump. I've just become frustrated beyond comprehension, and she threatens to quit, and it's quite entertaining, that's for sure.
Tweet?
But the Trump issue. Where is it? Oh, I tweeted it. Yeah, you can find it. I'll send it to you after.
We'll tag it in here then. Yeah. Perfect.
Okay. I tweeted it yesterday. It's a hilarious video. I mean, like I said, I thought it was going to be more popular online than it currently has been. But I think the major issue is Trump. I mean, Trump is an incredibly divisive figure, right? And my view of Trump and her view of Trump is different. And that's a good thing for a podcast that is coming from a mostly conservative perspective. You can't do, frankly, in this day and age, you can't do an all Trump or an all anti-Trump podcast that's going to be trying to target people who have a more conservative mindset. Although I have to say, we have a lot of listeners that are not conservatives, but that I'm fully aware that most people like to listen to people that agree with their politics. And so I like the fact that Liz is more pro-Trump than I am, but that does also provide some challenges. And some of them came up in episode 9 of The Death of Journalism.
Yeah, well, I just like the consistency and then the repartee, and it gives you a chance to think. So that is really what we're about here. John, once again, thank you very much. Are you hoping for the death of Liv? I don't want to keep getting into this. Is that the goal for you as far as golf goes?
I am hoping, with regard to Liv, that they hold firm on the world golf rankings, and that Liv events are not eligible for world golf rankings, which they should not be eligible for because they don't fit the criteria in any way, shape, or form. And that the world rankings of the top players will die on the vine, and they will start to panic, and the Saudis will get bored because, the hoopla will fade, and it's going to be obvious that they're spending billions of dollars for no chance of return. And in my dream scenario, in a couple of years, the Saudis pull the plug, and all those assholes that went over to live and showed themselves to be sellouts are left without a golf career, because unless they've won a major championship in the last 5 years, they will be ineligible for most of the major events. That's my dream scenario.
Okay, so kind of like the USFL or XFL, like he hate me. You're looking for Phil Mickelson to be the he hate me of the LIV golf.
I disagree with that, because I actually think the USFL was fantastic. The XFL I did not like, but I thought the USFL was great, and it actually drew the NFL in a better direction from the perspective of the sport. It kept him honest. See, I think there needs to be a real minor league, a real USFL to bring the NFL back to what football is. Unfortunately, LIV is dragging it. If you think about this in conservative and liberal terms, and it's ironic because Trump is attached to LIV and he's perceived as a conservative, when in fact he's just making money from LIV because they rent out his golf courses that no one else will rent out. So therefore he's in favor of LIV. And because he hates the PGA Tour because they took the tournament away from Doral, which he owns, and he hates the RNA because they took the British Open away from Turnberry, which he owns. I mean, it's all about vengeance for Trump. The reality is that LIV is dragging the PGA Tour in a more, what I see as liberal direction. The USFL dragged the NFL in a more conservative direction. So I was in favor of the USFL. I can't stand LIV.
Okay, that makes sense. So we're gonna go out here. I'm just gonna leave everybody with, I don't think Trump is gonna make it, only because Merrick Garland has put the works on him. That's maybe a November surprise, a December. What do we call it? Right before you know what I'm talking about. Let me
tell you why you're totally wrong. Let me tell you why you're totally wrong.
This is what I like. I'm making jokes and you're correcting me. There you go.
Well, no, you're wrong about this. One, because the last person in the world that wants to make Donald Trump ineligible to run for office or not viable to run for office is a Democratic appointed attorney general. The Democrats desperately need and want Donald Trump to run for president. They're not going to do anything that impedes that in any way, shape, or form. And so it's by the way, not one of Donald Trump's fans is going to abandon him because of something that the Biden DOJ does. I mean, if anything, it's going to energize his base further because we're living in an upside down world.
I get that. So you don't think anything will come about from that?
I don't know.
An October surprise?
I have no idea. I mean, even as much as I hate Trump, even I distrust the DOJ investigations of him. So if I distrust it, I can't imagine that too many persuadables actually trust it.
Okay, I keep saying we're leaving, but
that's okay.
Why would Trump put himself back into this situation? Because he's that much of a narcissist? I mean, this whole document stuff, you just got out, you've been impeached, and he's going to run again. Why? Why would you do this? Well,
vengeance. He wants vengeance on his enemies. He wants, he believes that he will show his critics to be wrong yet again. He's done that many times in his life, both in financial and political realms. And he wants vengeance. Plus, he loves the attention. So it fits a lot with his psychology. He's a narcissist who loves attention and who is driven by vengeance and by revenge. And that's why Donald Trump is doing this. It's not for the country. It has nothing to do with the country, unfortunately.
All right. Well, that's what makes me move along to vengeance and revenge. John, once again, thank you. And thanks everybody. Subscribe to our show and share John's stuff. It's fantastic. I implore you to go check out the show. Thanks again, John.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm leaving now. Bye, guys.
But she's back.
And now.
Chick-fil-A is completely overrated. It's not that good. I prefer Zaxby's. I prefer Popeyes.
Takes a tough man to make a tender forecast, Nick. And I guess that's me. Keep fucking that chicken.
Should I vote for Dick Cheney on the Libertarian Party? Do I have an obligation to vote for Dick Cheney?
I would say so.
Yes.
Did it work for those people?
No, it never does. I mean, these people somehow delude themselves into thinking it might, but it might work for us.
That one dude was like, not a podcast. I can't find it anywhere. And they don't have video. Oh yeah, Peter Janke. Yeah.
Yeah, I blocked him.
I'll do it. If he unblocks me, I'll...
He'll buy your shirt if you unblock him, Bert.
He's a wigger.
Yeah, nothing cooler than a 49-year-old wigger. I just started live streaming. Cut me some slack. I'm pretty high tech for a boomer. But anyways,
boomer.